I didn't know I was broken until a girl selling roasted corn looked at me like I wasn't. My name is Darien Oena, 30 years old, a billionaire. The kind of man whose name appears in Forbes Africa before it appears in anyone's prayers. The kind of man who flies private, sleeps in silence, and wakes up every morning in a penthouse so high above Lagos that the city looks like a circuit board, all light and movement and life. And none of it, has anything to do with him. I own buildings made of glass, floor to ceiling, ceiling to sky, glass walls, glass floors, glass everything. People look at those buildings and they see power. They see money walking upright. They see a man who figured out the world before the world figured him out. But here is what no one tells you about glass. Glass reflects everything and holds nothing. Stand in front of it long enough, and all you see is yourself. Over and over, your own face, your own eyes, at your own silence staring back at you like a question you stopped trying to answer years ago. That was my penthouse on the 54th floor of Oena Tower, Lagos Island. 14 rooms. 3 of them I had never entered. A kitchen designed by an architect in Milan, imported marble, copper fixtures, a refrigerator that cost more than most people's rent for a year. And most nights, dinner was whatever my chef left covered on the counter before he went home. Because I sat there alone, out in that enormous, expensive cathedral of a kitchen, eating in silence, and the silence was so thick, so heavy, so familiar. It felt like a second skin I had stopped trying to take off. The living room had a view of the Lagos skyline that journalists described as breathtaking. I stopped breathing when I looked at it. Not because it was beautiful, because beauty, when you have no one to share it with, stops being beautiful. It just becomes scenery, expensive wallpaper, a backdrop for a life that looks full from the outside and echoes from the inside. I had money, God, I had money, more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, money that multiplied while I slept, money that hired people, moved markets, funded futures. I had the kind of wealth that made rooms go quiet when I walked in. And women came. Of course they came. Lagos is a city of ambition dressed in beauty, and there was never a shortage of someone willing to sit across from me at dinner and to laugh at the right moments, to touch my arm with perfectly manicured hands and look at me with eyes that said all the right things. But here is what I learned very early, very painfully. There is a difference between a woman who smiles at you and a woman who smiles at what you own. One reaches your chest. The other only reaches your wallet. And I, Darien Oena, builder of glass towers, mover of markets, man who had never once asked anyone for anything. I had never, and not once in 30 years, felt a smile reach my chest. Because I had built walls the same way I built my buildings. Tall, reflective, impenetrable. Walls that came from a boy who watched his father destroy his mother's love like it was something worthless. Walls that came from a child who decided somewhere between the screaming and the silence that love was not a gift, it was a liability, a weakness. A door you left open only long enough for someone to walk in and burn the whole house down. And so I closed the door, locked it, and told myself that men like me, men built for boardrooms and balance sheets, we didn't need love. We needed results. For 30 years I believed love was a luxury people like me couldn't afford. Then one night, traffic changed my life. A wrong turn, a different road, a street I had never seen, and a girl sitting behind a smoking grill on the side of the road in a part of Lagos I had no business being in, selling roasted corn for 200 naira apiece, who looked up at my car window and smiled. Not at the car, not at me, just into the night, like she was the happiest person in the world, and the world owed her nothing, and she owed the world even less. And something in me, something I had buried so deep I forgot it had a name, cracked right down the middle. This is that story. And Lagos doesn't stop for anyone, not for rain, not for grief, not for billionaires sitting in the back of blacked-out G-wagons trying to remember the last time they felt something real. Lagos breathes like a restless animal, loud and hot and indifferent. And that night it was breathing harder than usual. The third mainland was locked, bumper to bumper. A sea of red taillights stretching so far into the distance it looked like the city itself was bleeding. My driver, Emmanuel,
I glanced in the rear-view mirror and said the words I had heard 1,000 times before. "Sir, I go find another road." I didn't look up from my phone. I nodded, and Emmanuel turned left into a street I had never been on in my life. That was the turn that cracked me open. The street was narrow and alive in the way that only certain parts of Lagos know how to be alive. The kind of alive that doesn't come from money or electricity or imported chandeliers. It comes from people.
From the smell of suya smoke curling up into the night air. From generators humming behind wooden stalls. From children chasing each other between the legs of adults who were too busy living to notice them running. From women calling prices across the road in Yoruba and Igbo and that particular Lagos pidgin that sounds like music when you're not trying to translate it. My window was up, the air conditioning was on, I was separated from all of it by a sheet of tinted glass, and then I saw her. But she was sitting behind a small grill on the side of the road, turning roasted corn with her bare hands, slowly, deliberately, the way someone moves when they are not in a hurry because they have decided that this moment, exactly this one, is enough. A kerosene lamp sat beside her, throwing warm orange light across her face. Children circled her stall like she was the center of something. 2 small boys were arguing over the last piece of pear. A little girl in a school uniform was tugging at her wrapper, ribbon hanging half undone from her braid, and without pausing, without looking down, the woman reached out and retied it, gently, perfectly, and went back to turning her corn. Nobody saw it. Nobody clapped. Nobody took a photo. It was just a small, quiet act of care, dissolved into the noise of the night like it cost nothing. And it stopped me completely. Not because she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And I had been to galas on 3 continents. I had sat across from women whose beauty was engineered, sculpted and perfected and presented like an exhibit. That was not what this was. This was something stranger than beauty. This was peace. The kind of peace that doesn't perform itself, that doesn't know it's being watched, that exists quietly in the middle of noise and smoke and everything Lagos throws at a person, and somehow remains completely, impossibly whole.
Some people are beautiful to look at. She was beautiful to exist near. My chest tightened in a way I did not have a name for. A tightness that wasn't pain and wasn't fear, but lived somewhere between the two. Somewhere deep behind the sternum, in the place where the boy I used to be was still quietly waiting for something he had stopped asking for. I don't know what possessed me. I pressed the button. The window came down.
And the noise and the heat and the smell of smoke rushed into the car all at once. Emmanuel glanced in the mirror, confused. My head of security, sitting in the front passenger seat, reached for his earpiece instinctively. I opened the door. "Sir!" I was already out. The ground was uneven under my Italian shoes. The air tasted like charcoal and rain, and something frying in palm oil somewhere nearby. People turned. A few recognized me. I saw it in their eyes, or that flicker of calculation. But I wasn't looking at them, I was walking toward her. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to say. She didn't look up immediately. That was the first thing that disarmed me. Every room I had ever walked into, boardrooms, ballrooms, airport lounges, restaurant floors, every single one of them shifted when I entered. People straightened, conversations paused. Eyes moved toward me the way eyes always move toward whoever has the most power in a space. I had grown so used to it that I stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing the sound of your own heartbeat. It was just the atmosphere I carried, but she kept turning her corn, slow, patient, unbothered. The grill hissed, the kerosene lamp flickered. The children who had been circling her stall went quiet one by one as they noticed the tall man in the dark suit standing at the edge of their world. He'd be slightly lost, slightly ridiculous, with no good reason to be there. Then she looked up, and for a moment, just one, neither of us said anything. Her eyes were the kind of dark that isn't empty, the kind that's full of something settled and unshakable, the way deep water is dark, not because there's nothing in it, but because there's too much. She looked at me the way very few people had ever looked at me in my adult life, not impressed, not calculating, not performing the particular brand of warmth that people perform when they want something from someone with money. She looked at me like I was simply a man, standing in front of a corn stall. At night, in a suit that cost more than her monthly earnings, with absolutely no explanation for any of it. And somehow, inexplicably calmly, she waited. "How much?" I said. It was the only thing I could find. 30 years of education, 2 degrees, a dozen languages of business and negotiation and charm, and standing in front of this woman in the orange light of a kerosene lamp, the most sophisticated thing I could produce was, "How much?" She looked at me for one more beat. Then she looked down at her grill. 200, she said. Her voice was low and even, no performance in it. Just a number offered the same way she offered it to everyone else on that street. I reached into my jacket for my wallet, and my fingers found it immediately. Black card, gold trim, the kind of card that makes waiters in Zurich smile differently. I held it out. She glanced at it, then at me, then back at her corn. "I don't have POS, she said simply. Behind me, I heard my security guard make a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was not quite not one either. I stood there, a billionaire, cardless, cashless, completely outmaneuvered by a woman who had not once raised her voice or changed her expression. I turned to Emmanuel. He was already there, 200 naira folded neatly in his hand, passed to me with the quiet professionalism of a man who had long accepted that his employer's life was not predictable. I placed the notes on the small wooden table at the edge of her stall. She tore back the outer layers of the corn, slowly, methodically, and held it out toward me. Our fingers touched. It lasted less than a second. The briefest overlap of skin, her fingers warm from the grill, mine cold from the air-conditioned car. And then it was over. But something moved through my chest in that fraction of a moment that I could not explain and cannot fully explain even now. Not electricity. That's too dramatic a word for what it was. It was quieter than electricity, more like recognition. The way a sound can sometimes feel familiar before you've identified it. Like your body knows something your mind hasn't caught up to yet. It was the smallest touch,
and in the loudest moment of my life. I looked down at the corn in my hand. It was golden and slightly charred at the edges, and it smelled extraordinary, and I was wearing a suit that had been dry cleaned that morning, and I had absolutely no idea how a billionaire was supposed to eat roasted corn with any form of dignity. I tried anyway. I bit into it from the side, wrong, kernels scattered. I tried from the top, also wrong. The heat caught me off guard, and I pulled back faster than I intended.
Oh, she watched all of this without commentary, patient as a woman who has seen everything Lagos has to offer and decided long ago that very little of it surprises her anymore. Then she laughed, soft, just barely. A sound that started somewhere low in her throat and broke into the night air like something warm and unhurried. It was the kind of laugh that doesn't mock, the kind that doesn't keep score, and the kind of laugh that takes the embarrassment right out of a moment and replaces it with something lighter, something that feels strangely like relief. I laughed too. I didn't plan to, it just came out of me, loose and unguarded, and I realized as it happened that I could not remember the last time I had laughed without thinking about it first. "You have to hold it straight," she said, reaching over and adjusting the corn in my hands without ceremony. Her fingers briefly curling over mine to correct the angle. "Like this." I looked at her. "What is your name?" I asked. She settled back onto her stool, reached for the next ear of corn on her grill, turned it once, twice, with the same unhurried confidence. "Amara," she said. She didn't ask for mine, and something about that, the complete, uncalculated absence of that question, made me want to stay longer than I had any reason to. I told myself I was going back for the corn. That was the story I constructed on the drive home that night, sitting in the back of the G-Wagon, Lagos sliding past the window, the taste of charcoal still faintly on my lips. I told myself it was simply good corn. Remarkably good corn. The kind of thing a man could reasonably return for without it meaning anything beyond the ordinary hunger of a person who had found something that tasted like it was made with intention. I told myself that for approximately 14 hours. 6:01 the following evening, I was in the car. Emmanuel caught my eyes in the rearview mirror and said nothing. He simply turned left before I asked him to, and I sat in the back of that car staring at my phone, not reading a single word on the screen, telling myself I was a grown man going to buy corn, and that there was absolutely nothing else to examine about this situation. The street was quieter in the early evening than it had been the night before. The market was still setting itself up. Traders arranging their stalls, generators being pulled to life, the smell of smoke beginning to layer itself into the air in that particular way Lagos evenings do, like the city is exhaling after holding its breath all day. She was already there, same stool, same grill, same unhurried posture, back straight, hands moving slowly over the corn, completely absorbed in the task in front of her, as though the task deserved that absorption. A radio somewhere nearby was playing a Fela record, the brass section drifting across the street and dissolving into generator noise and distant traffic. She looked up when she heard the footsteps. When she saw it was me, she did not smile immediately. She looked at me for a moment with those steady, unreadable eyes, and in that moment I understood with absolute clarity that she knew. She knew this was not about corn. She knew it the way perceptive people always know things. Not because you've said anything, but because you've said too much by showing up at all. She looked back at her grill. "Same order?" she asked. "Yes," I said. I sat on the low wooden bench beside her stall. My suit was worth more than the entire street. I sat down anyway. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The failure record moved from one song into another. A child ran past us chasing a plastic ball. A woman across the road called out a price in Yoruba and laughed at her own joke. The evening settled around us the way evenings settle in Lagos when you stop fighting them, heavy and warm and full of everything happening at once. Then she asked, simply, without looking up, "What do you do?" The question landed softer than it should have. It was a small question, an ordinary question. The kind strangers ask each other every day across this city in the first 30 seconds of meeting. But coming from her, in that voice, at that particular moment, it felt different. It felt like she was asking something underneath the question. Not what do you own, or what are you worth, or what can you do for me? Just, who are you? What do you do with your hours? What is the shape of your days? Technology, I said. She nodded slowly, turning the corn once. Ah, a small pause. Computer man. Something moved across her face when she said it. Not quite a smile, not quite amusement, but something in between. The kind of expression that suggests a private thought that is not unkind, but is definitely its own. I looked at her. Something like that. If she only knew, if she knew that those two words, computer man, were sitting on top of 600 employees, 4 international offices, a valuation that had been discussed on Bloomberg twice in the last year. And if she knew that the phone in my jacket pocket had 3 missed calls from a venture capital firm in San Francisco who wanted 30 minutes of my time and had been waiting 4 days for it. If she knew that the man sitting on her low wooden bench in the evening smoke had just returned from a conference in Dubai where people paid $12,000 to be in the same room as him and hear him speak for 40 minutes, computer man, I had never in my life been so happy to be reduced to 2 words. And you? I asked. She glanced at me sideways. You can see what I do. I mean, is this all you do, or is there something wrong with it? The question was quiet. No defensiveness sharpened it. No challenge lifted its edges. It was simply a question asked with the particular confidence of someone who does not need the answer to go a certain way in order to feel okay about themselves. No, I said. And I meant it completely. She held the corn out to me. I took it this time without fumbling. Small victory. She noticed. I saw the corner of her mouth move and said nothing. We sat in a silence that was not uncomfortable. I had closed billion-dollar deals without trembling. I had sat across from men who ran governments and held the conversation with both hands. I had walked into rooms where the entire outcome depended on the next thing out of my mouth, and I had never once lost the thread. But sitting beside Amara on a low bench on a side street in Lagos, finding something to say that was honest and simple and not dressed in the language of power or strategy or careful self-presentation, that felt like walking across a bridge made of air. I looked at the street, at the smoke, at the evening folding itself into night around us. She was looking at the grill, but she was smiling. Not at me, not at anything in particular, just smiling. The way people smile when something quiet inside them is content. When the moment they are in, exactly as it is enough. My chest tightened for the second time in 2 days. And this time I didn't pretend not to understand why. I came back the 3rd night with something in my pocket. Not flowers. Not an arrangement sent ahead by an assistant. Not a reservation at a restaurant with a 3-month wait list. Not the kind of gesture designed to impress someone by demonstrating how effortlessly you can access things other people cannot. I had done all of those things before. I knew exactly how they landed. The brief widening of eyes, the practiced gratitude, the smile that said thank you, and underneath it said I know what this means and I know what it costs and I know what you expect in return. I didn't want any of that from her. I went to a jeweler on Victoria Island that afternoon. It's not the flagship store. The small one at the back, run by an old Yoruba man named Bello who had been making pieces by hand for 30 years and whose work didn't appear in magazines because he had never once called a journalist. I told him I wanted something simple, something that looked like it had been made for someone who didn't need to be told she was worth something, someone who already knew. He made me a bracelet, thin gold chain, a single small clasp. No stones, no excess, no statement. The kind of thing that sat quietly on a wrist and whispered rather than announced. I held it in my jacket pocket the entire drive to the market and told myself 3 different times that I was not going to give it to her, that it was too soon, that I didn't know her well enough, that a woman who had not once asked my name in 3 evenings of conversation was probably not a woman who wanted to receive jewelry from a man she barely knew. I gave it to her anyway, and I set it on the wooden table beside her grill without prelude, without ceremony, without the elaborate framing that I had rehearsed in the car. Just placed the small velvet pouch next to her kerosene lamp and sat down. She looked at it, then at me. She didn't touch it. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." She didn't move toward it. Her hands stayed exactly where they were, folded in her lap, and she looked at me with an expression that was not warm and was not cold, but was entirely, completely serious. "I don't take gifts from men I don't know," she said. 4 words would have been enough. She used 9, and every one of them landed cleanly, without apology, without softening, without the particular female performance of refusing something while leaving the door open for the refusal to be overridden. She meant it the way she meant everything. Simply, completely, without decoration. Something moved through my chest that I can only describe as respect, or not attraction. Though that was already there, had been there since the first night, sitting in the background of every conversation like a current running beneath still water. This was different. This was the specific, involuntary respect that comes when you encounter a person who knows exactly where their edges are and holds them without flinching, regardless of who is standing on the other side of those edges. I had been in rooms with senators, with chief executives, with men whose net worth made mine look like a starting point. And very few of them, very few people in my adult life, male or female, had ever made me feel the particular quality of small that I felt sitting on that bench in that market, holding out a bracelet that a woman with 200 naira corn was declining without breaking a sweat. "I'm not trying to buy you anything," I said. "I'm not trying to buy anything." "Then what are you trying to do?" The question sat between us.
What was I trying to do? I had been asking myself the same thing for 3 nights. I had stood in my penthouse that morning, looking out at the Lagos skyline, and asked the glass walls, seriously actually asked them, what exactly I thought I was building by returning to a street market every evening in a suit, sitting on a bench made of salvaged wood, eating corn I didn't need, talking to a woman who had not once adjusted herself to make me more comfortable. "I don't know yet," I said.
And it was the most honest thing I had said to another person in years. She looked at me for a long moment. The lamp flickered between us. Somewhere down the street a child laughed at something, and the sound carried clean through the night air. She reached out and picked up the pouch, opened it slowly, held the bracelet up in the orange light, and looked at it the way she looked at everything, without performance, without the manufactured delight that money was supposed to produce. I just looking, seeing it clearly for what it was. "It's simple," she said. "I thought you'd prefer that." Another pause. She turned it once between her fingers. "If I ever feel uncomfortable," she said quietly, "I'll return it." I stared at her. In 30 years of business, I had negotiated contracts worth hundreds of millions of naira. I had sat across tables from lawyers trained at the best institutions in the world, whose entire purpose was to find the clause, the angle, or the precise word that protected their client's position absolutely. I had been in rooms where the negotiation was so layered and so intricate that it took 3 weeks and 4 redrafts to arrive at a single sentence everyone could live with. Not one of those negotiations had ever made me laugh the way I laughed in that moment. It came out of me before I could think about it. Genuine, full, unguarded, the laugh of a man who has just been completely, elegantly outmaneuvered by a woman sitting behind a corn grill in a market in Lagos, wearing a bracelet she had just placed conditions on, like she was reviewing the terms of an agreement. She looked at me, slightly amused, not fully, just enough. "You think I'm joking?" she said. "No," I said, still laughing. "I think you're the most serious person I've ever met in my life." She turned back to her grill, but she was wearing the bracelet. And I realized, and sitting there in the smoke and the warm light, that no woman had ever made me earn something so small, so honestly. I hadn't wanted to buy her. I had wanted to earn the right to stand beside her. And somehow, impossibly, on a low bench on a side street, in the middle of everything Lagos, I felt for the first time like I was beginning to. It took me 4 visits to ask her. Not because I lacked courage. I had never lacked courage in any room, in any situation, in any negotiation that mattered. But this was different from courage. This was something closer to carefulness, the specific, unfamiliar carefulness of a man who senses, for the first time in his adult life, that the thing in front of him is worth not rushing. I asked her on a Thursday evening, after the market had thinned and the street had gone quieter, and she was wrapping the remaining corn in foil with the methodical patience she brought to every small task. I told her I wanted her to come to my home for tea. Nothing more. Just tea in the afternoon on a Saturday, if she was willing. She was quiet for a long time. "Your home?" she repeated. Not a question. More like she was placing the word somewhere in her mind and examining it from different angles before responding. "Yes." She looked at me with those steady eyes. "Why?" "Because I want to see what happens when you walk into the most expensive room I own and look at it the way you look at everything else. Because I want to know if the version of you that exists here on this street in the smoke and the lamplight is the same version that exists everywhere. Because I am 48 hours away from flying to Johannesburg for a board meeting, and every time I sit in that penthouse alone, I think about a woman on a wooden bench who told me she would return a bracelet if she felt uncomfortable, and I have not stopped thinking about it since." "Because I'd like to know you somewhere different," I said. She looked at the foil in her hands, folded it once, deliberately. "Okay," she said. Just that, okay. The way she agreed to things, without theatre, without the extended performance of being persuaded. She decided, and then she said the decision, and that was the whole of it. She arrived on Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. Emmanuel brought her in the car. She had refused to give her address initially, then relented after making him wait at the end of her street so her neighbours wouldn't see. She stepped out of the car in front of Oena Tower, wearing a simple brown dress, cotton, knee-length, a small gold stud in each ear. Her hair was wrapped neatly at the back of her neck, and she was holding a small bag in front of her with both hands, the way people hold things when they need something to anchor them. She stood at the entrance and looked up. The building rose 54 floors above her. Glass and steel and the particular arrogance of architecture designed to make people feel the precise difference between themselves and the person who commissioned it. I had stood at that entrance 1,000 times and never once thought about what it communicated to someone arriving for the first time. Standing beside her in that moment, seeing it through her eyes, I thought about it. She said nothing, she just looked. Then she walked inside. The lobby was marble. Floor, walls. I had the desk where my head of building security sat. He greeted her with the careful neutrality of someone who had been briefed and was performing his briefing professionally. She nodded at him once, politely, and turned her attention to the floor beneath her feet. She walked across it the way someone walks across something they are not sure will hold them. Not afraid exactly. Too dignified for fear, but cautious. Her steps were smaller than her normal ones, I could tell. Because I had watched her move in the market, where she walked with the loose confidence of someone completely at home in their environment. Here she was precise, contained, a person navigating a planet whose gravity she hadn't yet calibrated. The elevator, the 54th floor, the doors opening directly into the penthouse. She stepped out and stood still. The Lagos skyline filled every wall, the kind of view that on a clear Saturday afternoon, Hull stretched all the way to where the water met the sky at the edge of the island. The room was quiet in the way that only rooms separated from the world by 54 floors can be quiet, not silent. Just removed, like being inside a held breath. She turned slowly, taking it in without commentary. No gasp, no performance of being impressed, none of the things people usually produce when they enter that room for the first time. She just saw it. All of it. The way she saw everything. But I had tea set on the low table near the window. She sat across from me and placed her small bag beside her feet with the same neatness she brought to folding foil in the market. She accepted her cup with both hands and held it, the way people who grew up being taught to hold things properly hold them, with a kind of habitual care that nobody taught her for this context, but that belonged to her regardless of context. For a while we talked about small things. Her family, 2 younger brothers, a mother who sold fabric in Tejuosho market. My company, I kept it simple, surface level, the same way I always did in early conversations because the full version of it tended to change the atmosphere in ways I had long stopped finding useful. Then she looked out at the skyline, at the city spread below us like something vast and breathing and indifferent to the altitude. And she asked, quietly, without looking at me, "Do rich people ever get lonely?" The question moved through the room like a stone dropped into still water. I didn't answer immediately. I set my cup down. I looked at the skyline she was looking at the buildings and the water and the afternoon light pulling long across everything. And I let the question sit between us for a moment, the way honest questions deserve to sit before they are answered. "Yes," I said. She turned and looked at my face then. Not quickly, and slowly. The way she looked at the bracelet that first night, examining it clearly without the interference of what she wanted to find. Just looking at what was actually there. The silence held. Then she said softly, so softly I almost didn't catch it beneath the quiet of the room, "I think you've been lonely a very long time." 8 words. Mind, 8 words, and something behind my sternum moved, shifted, like a wall that had been standing for so long it had stopped feeling like a wall and had started feeling like a feature of the landscape, suddenly and irrevocably cracked. Not broken, not demolished, just cracked. Enough to let light through one thin line. No one had ever said that to me, not my board, not the women who had passed through my life leaving perfume and polite goodbyes, but not the therapist I had seen twice in my late 20s before deciding that excavating the past was a project with no clear return on investment. Not a single person in 30 years had looked at me, at the towers and the cars and the careful, impenetrable surface of Darien Oena, and named the thing underneath it with that particular combination of gentleness and precision. She wasn't asking for a response. She wasn't offering a solution. She was simply seeing me. And I sat across from her in the most expensive room I owned, with the whole of Lagos laid out below us like an offering, and I felt more exposed than I had ever felt in my life. Not afraid, just seen. For the first time. Completely. I had never told anyone the story I told her that afternoon, not in full, not with all the details still attached, still raw, still carrying the particular weight of things that happened to a child and never fully left him even after the child grew into a man who built towers and conquered markets and trained himself to speak about vulnerability the way politicians speak about reform, carefully in the abstract, from a very safe distance. But something about the way she had said those 8 words, "I think you've been lonely a very long time," opened a door I hadn't realized I'd been standing behind. And I walked through it. I was born in Ajegunle. Not the Ajegunle people reference as shorthand for struggle, casually from the comfort of their Lekki apartments. The actual Ajegunle, the narrow streets and the zinc rooftops and the open gutters and the sound of 10 families living their entire lives through walls so thin you knew your neighbor's grief before they told you. That Ajegunle, or the one that does not appear in the origin stories of billionaires until the billionaire has become successful enough that the poverty becomes interesting rather than embarrassing. My mother's name was Grace. She sold fruit by the roadside every morning from 5 until the afternoon heat made standing impossible. Oranges, pawpaw, bananas, arranged with a precision that always moved me as a child, because she was not a woman who had been given much to work with, and yet everything she touched, she organized with a kind of quiet dignity, like she was telling the world, without words, without complaint, that what she had was hers, and it deserved to be presented well. She was beautiful in the way that certain women are beautiful. Not spectacularly, not in a way that stopped traffic, but in the deep, enduring way of a woman whose character has shaped her face over time until the two things are indistinguishable. When she smiled, the smile came from somewhere genuine. When she was sad,
she didn't perform sadness, she just carried it, the way she carried everything, with both hands and without theatre. My father was different. My father was the kind of man who was charming in public and corrosive in private. The kind of man who made promises the way some people make gestures, easily, with full feeling in the moment, and with no structural intention behind them. He promised my mother a better life every few months.
And in the spaces between the long absences and the unexplained silences and the mornings, she thought I was asleep, but I was lying on the mat in the corner, listening to her cry into the fabric of her wrapper so quietly that the sound wouldn't reach me. She thought she was protecting me. I heard everything. I was 9 years old when he left for the last time, not dramatically. There was no final argument, no broken thing, no scene that a person could point to and say, there. That was the moment. And he simply went out one morning, and the space where he had been in our lives slowly closed over like water over a stone until it was as though the stone had never been there. Except the stone had been there. And my mother's face knew it. And I knew it. And we never spoke about it because speaking about it would have required both of us to admit how much of ourselves we had organized around a man who had not organized anything around us. I watched what love did to her. I watched it arrive in her like a season and leave in her like a drought. I watched it make her hopeful and then hollowed. I watched the woman who arranged her fruit with quiet dignity spend years quietly rearranging herself around a man who did not deserve the care she took. And I made a decision, not loudly, not with the conscious deliberateness of an adult making a vow. The way children make their most consequential decisions, quietly, in the back of their minds, as a simple conclusion drawn from available evidence. The evidence said love is a door you open for someone and they use it to leave. The evidence said the people who love hardest get hurt most completely. The evidence said my mother was the best person I knew, and love had done nothing for her except take things away. So I closed the door, and I built. I built with everything I had, every hour, every idea, every burning, a relentless hunger that growing up with nothing deposits in a person if they let it. I built past secondary school on a scholarship. I built through university. I built my first product at 22 in a room I shared with 2 other people, on a laptop with a cracked screen, surviving on Gary and the particular fuel of a person who has decided that the world owes them nothing and intends to take everything anyway. By 28, I had my first 100 million. By 30, glass towers, a marble floors, a penthouse above the city I had grown up beneath. And I told myself I had won. Love looked like weakness. So I built a life where I would never need it, where I was so sufficient, so complete, so constructed, that the door in me that my father had broken could stay closed indefinitely, and nobody would ever notice what was behind it. Because there would be nothing behind it. Because I would make sure of it. I stopped talking. The room held the silence. Lagos lay below us, how indifferent and vast, doing what it always did, moving, breathing, carrying on without pause or apology. I didn't look at her. I looked at my hands, the hands that had signed the documents and built the company and shaken the right hands in the right rooms, the hands that had, very recently, fumbled roasted corn in front of a woman who had laughed at them with a warmth that asked for nothing in return. Then I felt it, her hand, settling over mine on the armrest between us, not reaching for me,
Not grasping, just placing itself there, warm and still and completely certain of its right to be there. I looked down at it, then up at her face. Her eyes were not wet. Her expression was not the collapsed, effortful empathy of someone processing another person's pain and trying to find the right thing to project back at them. She was not performing understanding. She simply understood the way people understand things they have lived adjacent to.
Or the way people who have watched their own mothers carry too much, in silence, without complaint, recognize that carrying in someone else without needing it explained. She didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't say, "You deserved better." She didn't say anything that would have required me to respond and therefore rebuild the distance. She just held my hand, quietly, the way she retied the little girl's ribbon that first night in the market, without announcement, without expectation, and as a simple act of care offered to someone who needed it without making them feel the weight of needing it. And sitting there, in the silence of the 54th floor, with the whole of Lagos below me and the whole of my history behind me and her hand over mine like something decided. The boy in the corner of that Achagunla room, listening to his mother cry, finally, felt less alone. Lagos noticed before I was ready for it too. Well, that is the thing about this city that people who have never lived inside it don't fully understand. Lagos is not just a place. It is an organism with 1,000 eyes and 1,000,000 mouths, and it processes information about its inhabitants the way a body processes heat, instantly, involuntarily, and with complete indifference to whether you wanted it processed at all. It started small. A photograph, someone on that market street, a bystander, a trader,
Someone whose phone was already raised for an entirely different reason, had captured the image without me knowing. Me, stepping out of the G-Wagon, the suit, the street, the corn stall in the background. It wasn't a clear photograph. It wasn't damning in any obvious way, but Lagos doesn't need clarity. Lagos needs suggestion. And the suggestion was enough. By the following Monday, 3 blogs had run variations of the same headline. Darien Oena, tech billionaire.
seen repeatedly at roadside market on Lagos mainland. Sources say he has been visiting a female trader. By Wednesday, it had a title, Billionaire Dating Street Vendor, 5 words, no question mark. The kind of headline engineered to produce a specific reaction in each person who reads it. Amusement in some, judgment in others, and in a particular category of Lagos society, with the particular category that had spent years positioning themselves in proximity to my name and my net worth, something considerably sharper than either. My phone began. First, it was Tunde, my oldest friend from university, now a partner at a law firm in Victoria Island, a man whose instinct in any situation was first to assess the liability. He called on Tuesday morning with the specific tone he used when he believed I was making a decision that required adult supervision. Darien.
Yeah, what is this I'm reading? Good morning, Tunde. Don't good morning me. There are photos, there are blogs, there are people asking questions. What exactly is happening on the mainland? I'm buying corn, I said. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Darien. Tunde, this is not something you can be casual about. Do you understand what people are saying? Do you understand what this looks like from the outside? I understood perfectly what it looked like from the outside.
I simply had stopped caring what things looked like. From the outside, approximately the same moment, a woman in a simple brown dress sat across from me on the 54th floor and told me I had been lonely a very long time. But I didn't say that to Tunde. The board was next. My CFO, Felix, 53 years old, a man who had been managing the financial architecture of Oena Technologies since its 2nd year, and who approached all human behavior as though it were a line item requiring justification, requested an urgent meeting on Thursday morning. He arrived with 2 printed articles and the expression of a man attending a funeral for something preventable. I want to understand, he said, placing the articles on the desk between us with the careful precision of evidence being presented.
Is this serious? Because if it is serious, we need to discuss optics. We need to discuss what this communicates to investors. We need to... Felix, I said. He stopped. When was the last time I asked the board's permission for something that wasn't a financial decision? He looked at me. This affects... When? A pause. Never. Then we don't need this meeting. He gathered his articles. He left. And to his credit, he did not raise it again, though I was aware.
are in the particular way that CEOs are always aware of the atmospheric temperature of their organizations, that the conversation continued in the corridors and the group chats and the private lunches, where my name was being discussed with the concerned, proprietary anxiety of people who had built comfortable lives in the orbit of mine. But it was the party that crystallized everything, a charity gala 3 weeks after the photographs appeared, in the kind of Lagos event that exists primarily to allow a certain tier of the city to see and be seen by itself. Gold tablecloths, imported champagne, the same 200 people who attend every gathering of this type, wearing different outfits and performing the same social choreography they have been performing for years. I went because I had committed to it before any of this began. I stood near the bar in the second hour, half present, nursing a drink, or calculating how soon I could leave without it reading as significant. She came from my left, a woman I had met at similar events a dozen times. Lagos society, old money, the particular brand of polished that comes from years of being told, your polish is the standard by which others should be measured. She was with 2 friends. They had that look. The look of people who have been discussing something and have decided that one of them will say it out loud. She stopped beside me and smiled the smile. "Darien, we've been worried about you." "Have you?" This girl from the market. She tilted her head, a small, practiced gesture of concern. "I mean, it's a sweet story, of course, a little project, but surely you're not—" She paused, letting the pause do its work. "I mean, what could you possibly have in common? What does she even bring to your world?" The 2 friends watched me. The bar was busy enough that several nearby conversations had quietly lowered their volume, and I set my glass down. I looked at her, not with heat, not with the performative coldness of a man demonstrating control, just directly, the way you look at something you have decided to be completely honest about. "Careful," I said quietly. "You're speaking about the woman I love." The word arrived in the room before I had consciously decided to use it. Love. I had not said it to Amara, and I had barely said it to myself. Had been orbiting it for weeks the way you orbit a truth that is too large to look at directly, acknowledging its gravity without yet standing in front of it. But standing at that bar, not listening to a woman with manicured hands and a borrowed sense of superiority speak about Amara with the casual dismissiveness of someone who had never in her life needed to be remarkable because she had always simply been acceptable. The word came out of me clean and certain and final. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room recalibrating. The woman's smile thinned. Her friends looked at their glasses. The nearby conversations did not immediately resume. I picked up my drink. And I thought about Amara on her stool in the market, turning corn in the lamplight, completely unbothered by the existence of rooms like this one. The thought settled something in me. I stayed another 20 minutes. Then I left. And on the drive home, for the first time since the blogs and the board meeting and Tunde's worried phone calls, I felt not defensive, not embattled, not the low simmer of a man managing a situation. I felt clear, and the kind of clear that only comes when you have said the true thing out loud for the first time and discovered that the world did not end, that it actually finally began. I had not been back in 11 years. Not because I had forgotten where it was. You don't forget a place that shaped the entire architecture of who you became, every ambition, every wall, every decision made in the dark about who you would be when you finally got out. You don't forget it? Or do you simply stop going back because going back requires you to stand in the same air as the version of yourself you worked hardest to leave behind? and most days that is not a meeting you are prepared to schedule. But I took Amara on a Saturday morning in October, and when the sky over Lagos was the particular pale blue that only appears in that brief window between the end of rainy season and the beginning of harmattan, clear and wide, and carrying a quality of light that made everything look slightly more honest than usual. I didn't tell her where we were going. She sat beside me in the car. She had stopped, sitting in the back, had migrated to the passenger seat 3 weeks earlier without announcement. And I had noticed it and said nothing, because noticing it without saying anything felt like the correct response to a small, significant thing. And she watched the city change through the window as we drove. She always watched the city this way, alert, present. Like Lagos was a conversation she was permanently engaged in and didn't want to miss a word of. When the roads narrowed and the buildings lowered and the street names changed from the anglicized geography of the island to the older, to denser, more honest geography of the mainland, she sat up slightly, not alarmed, just attentive. Emmanuel turned onto the street. I had not asked him to find it. He already knew. He had known since the beginning. Emmanuel, who had been driving me for 7 years and who had watched me become the kind of man whose name appeared on buildings, had always known where I came from. He had simply never been asked to take me there. The car stopped. I sat for a moment before opening the door, and the street was the same and entirely different in the way that places are when time has moved through them without money following. The buildings were older now, the walls more faded, the zinc rooftops more patched, the open gutter along the left side of the road deeper with disuse. A group of children were playing in the space between 2 buildings, barefoot, loud, improvising a game with a deflated ball and rules that appeared to be renegotiated every 30 seconds. Our washing lines crossed the space overhead. Someone was frying something in groundnut oil, and the smell of it came through the car window before I had fully opened the door. I stepped out. Amara came around to stand beside me. She didn't reach for my hand. She stood close, shoulder nearly at my arm, and looked at the street with the same open, unguarded attention she brought to everything. I walked to where my mother's house had been. It was still standing. A different family now. I could tell by the curtains, yellow where ours had been green, and a small satellite dish mounted at an angle above the front window that hadn't existed in my childhood. But the bones were the same. The low concrete step at the front where my mother had sat on Sunday mornings, plaiting her hair before church. The mango tree at the side that had been small when I was a child and was now enormous, its roots lifting the edge of the concrete path in a slow, patient, or irresistible way that I found, standing there at 30 years old, unexpectedly moving. I stood in front of it for a long time. Amara stood beside me. I told her things I had not assembled into sentences before, not for a therapist, not for Tunde, not for anyone. I told her about the step and my mother's hands and the particular sound of the generator on the street cutting out at 10 p.m. every night, and the darkness that followed it, and how I had lain in that darkness as a boy, making silent, furious promises to a future I could not yet see. I told her about leaving at 18 with 1 bag and the specific quality of not looking back, not because I was strong enough not to, but because I knew that if I turned around and saw my mother standing at that door, I would not be able to make my legs keep moving forward. She listened to all of it. She didn't rush me, didn't fill the pauses with reassurance, didn't interpret or contextualize or offer the story back to me shaped differently. Or she just stood beside me in the October light and listened the way she had always listened, as though what I was saying deserved the full weight of her attention, and she had decided without calculation, to give it. When I stopped talking, the street continued. Children shouting, the frying smell, a rooster somewhere making its irrelevant announcement to no one. Then she spoke, softly, almost to herself, but turned toward me. "You never left this place."
Did you? The question moved through me from the outside in, not painfully. The way a key moves through a lock. The resistance, then the release, then the understanding that the door was always meant to open. I looked at the house, at the mango tree lifting the path, at the children playing their renegotiated game in the gap between buildings. She was right. 11 years of absence.
Glass towers and marble floors and 54 floors of carefully constructed distance between Darien Oena and the boy who had lain in the dark making promises. And I had carried every inch of that street inside me every single day. In the relentlessness in the walls, in the compulsive building, and the terror of stillness and the inability to sit in a beautiful room and simply feel that it was enough. I had never left. I had just built higher. "No," I said. "Would I never left?" She turned to look at me then, and her eyes were bright. Not spilling over, but close. The brightness of someone who understands something completely and feels the weight of understanding it. I looked at her face in the October light. This woman from a market street who had never asked me for anything, who had negotiated the terms of a bracelet, who had retied a child's ribbon without looking down, or who had sat on my 54th floor and seen through every glass wall I owned to the thing I had been hiding behind all of them. "Money built walls around me," I said. The words came out quieter than I intended. Every deal, every building, every year I told myself I was free because I had more. But I wasn't free, I was just further away from the thing I was afraid of. She waited. "You opened the door," I said. "I don't know how, I don't know when exactly."
But you did." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not the composed, considering smile of the woman at the corn stall who had not yet decided what to make of me. Not the warm, amused smile of the woman who had watched me fail to eat corn with dignity. This was different. This was the smile of a person receiving something they did not know they had been waiting to receive. Fragile at the edges and completely, absolutely genuine at the center, her eyes spilled over, just barely.
On one quiet line down one cheek that she didn't wipe away. She didn't say anything. She reached for my hand, and we stood there, on the street that made me, in front of the house that shaped me, beside the mango tree that had outlasted everything I had tried to outrun. And for the first time since I was a boy, lying in the dark, making promises to a future I couldn't see, I was completely, entirely present. Not building towards something, not running from something, just here, with her. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. It was a Wednesday night when everything shifted, not dramatically, not with the orchestrated grandeur of a man who had planned the moment and rehearsed its components. I had spent 30 years orchestrating meetings, acquisitions, presentations, the careful management of how Darien Oena was perceived in every room he entered. I had become so proficient at construction that I had nearly forgotten what it felt like to simply let something happen. This happened. The market was quieter than usual, a midweek lull, fewer traders, fewer buyers, the street settling into the particular ease of an evening that wasn't trying to be anything. The generators hummed their constant bass note beneath everything, or somewhere further down the road, A radio played something slow and old, the kind of music that doesn't ask permission to reach inside you. The smoke from her grill rose in a straight line into the night air, which meant the wind had gone still, which meant the night was holding its breath. I had been sitting on the bench for 40 minutes. We had talked about her brothers, about a fabric order her mother had taken on that was proving complicated, and about an idea I was turning over for a new product that I hadn't told anyone else about yet. She had listened and asked 2 questions that revealed she understood the problem better than 2 of my senior engineers had when I'd described it to them. She hadn't acknowledged this. She had just asked the questions the way she asked everything, plainly, without performance, because she was curious, and curiosity was simply how she moved through the world. I had been watching her in the lamplight, but the way the orange glow moved across her face when she leaned forward to turn the corn, the way she tucked one foot beneath her on the stool when she was relaxed, a small, unconscious habit I had catalogued without meaning to over weeks of evenings. The way she used her hands when she talked about something that mattered to her, not dramatically, not for effect, but with the natural expressiveness of a person whose interior life was too full to be contained entirely in words. And I had the necklace in my jacket pocket, thinner than the bracelet, a single pendant, a small disc of gold, plain on one side, with one word pressed into the other, in letters so small you had to hold it close to read it. The word was home. I had not explained this to the jeweler. I had simply said the word and let Bello decide what to do with it, and he had done this, and when I had held it in my palm in his small shop, I had known, without question, that it was right. But when I reached into my pocket, I found that the necklace was not what needed to come out first. I set it on the table between us. She glanced at it, then at me. Something in my expression made her leave it there without reaching for it, made her sit back slightly and give me the particular quality of attention she reserved for moments when she sensed that what was coming next mattered. I looked at the lantern between us, at the small flame moving inside the glass. I need to say something, I said. And I need to say it without it coming out like a negotiation or a strategy or something I've constructed to produce a specific result, because that is how I say most things, and I don't want to do that with you. She waited. I've watched myself with you, I said, over these weeks, and I've noticed something I don't fully know how to name. I've noticed that I am less afraid in your presence than I am everywhere else. And not because you make things easier, you don't. You make things harder, actually. You ask questions that don't have comfortable answers. You refuse things I offer without apology. You sit in silence without filling it, which means I have to sit in it too, and I am not naturally comfortable in silence, because silence is where the things I've been avoiding live. I paused. But I keep coming back. Every night, not for the corn. The corner of her mouth moved, just barely.
As I know, she said softly. I don't want to rescue you, I said. I want to be clear about that. I know how this looks from the outside. Billionaire, market trader, the obvious narrative. I'm not interested in that narrative. I'm not interested in lifting you into my world and watching you disappear into it. I'm not interested in becoming the story of the man who saved someone. I looked at her directly. I want to walk beside you. That's all, whatever that means, wherever it goes. Beside you. As an equal, not above, not beneath, beside. The market continued around us. The generators, the distant radio, the soft percussion of ordinary Lagos life, carrying on with complete indifference to the 2 people sitting in lantern light at a corn stall, having the most important conversation of at least one of their lives. She looked at me for a long time. The kind of long that is not uncomfortable, but is not casual either. The kind of long that belongs to a person who has learned,
through some combination of nature and experience, that the right response to a significant thing is not speed, that some moments deserve to be weighed before they are answered. Then she said, quietly and with complete steadiness, "I won't shrink myself to fit your world." Not a warning, not a condition delivered with an edge, just a fact, offered the way she offered all her facts, clearly and without apology, all from the settled place inside her that had never required anyone's permission to exist. And something in me, something that had been braced without my realizing it, for a version of this conversation that ended with accommodation, with a woman reshaping herself to fit the container I represented, released. I smiled, slowly, the full kind. "Good," I said. "I'd rather build a bigger one." She looked at me, and for a moment she simply looked at my face, at the sincerity she apparently found there, at whatever it was she was reading in me that told her the words were not strategy, were not construction, were not the elaborate architecture of a man performing honesty in order to achieve a result. They were just true. She leaned forward, slowly, with the same unhurried certainty she brought to everything, the same quality of movement that said, "I have decided, and the decision is made, and there is no performance in what comes next." What her lips met mine, soft, warm, tasting faintly of the palm oil and spice of the evening. Not urgent, or nothing about Amara was ever urgent in the performing, desperate way. It was the kiss of a person who had decided to arrive fully, and was arriving fully, with everything they were, without reservation and without rush. The lantern burned between us, the generators hummed, the radio somewhere down the street played its old, slow song, when in the market, the noise and the smoke and the 100 ordinary lives moving through the night around us fell completely, entirely, absolutely away. There was only this, the lantern light on her face, her hand finding my jaw, the 30 years of silence behind me, and the sound somewhere beneath everything of a door, long locked, long sealed, long mistaken for a wall, finally, gently, permanently, opening. I had faced harder rooms than this one. I had stood in front of hostile boards and delivered numbers that restructured the future of my company. I had negotiated in rooms where the wrong word cost millions and the right word cost nothing, and the difference between the two lived entirely in the quality of your nerve. I had spoken at conferences where the audience held the kind of power that made most people revise their sentences 3 times before releasing them into the air. I had never once shaken in any of those rooms. Standing at the entrance to the press conference hall on the ground floor of Oena Tower, I was shaking. Not visibly, not in the way that other people could see. My hands were still. My posture was what it always was. The suit was the right suit. The expression was composed. But beneath all of it, in the interior architecture of my body where no one had access, something was trembling. A deep, foundational trembling. The kind that doesn't come from fear of failure, but from the rarer, or more disorienting fear of something that matters completely. Because this mattered completely. I had made the decision 2 weeks after the night at the corn stall. Not impulsively. I did not make important decisions impulsively. I had sat with it. I had turned it over in the early mornings when Lagos was still dark, and the penthouse was quiet, and the only sound was the distant water, and my own thoughts moving through the space between who I had been and who I was becoming. And I had asked myself every honest question I could find, every question that didn't have a comfortable answer. And every answer pointed the same direction. Amara had not wanted a press conference. She had been characteristically direct about this. Sitting across from me in the penthouse a week earlier, both hands around her tea, looking at me with the calm, undeflectable steadiness that I had come to understand was her particular form of love. "I don't need cameras," she had said.
I don't know, I told her. This isn't for the cameras. It's for clarity. There are stories being written about you, about us, and most of them are wrong. Not wrong in ways that matter to me, but wrong in ways that might eventually reach people you care about, your mother, your brothers. I don't want them hearing a version of this that isn't true. She had looked at her tea for a long moment. "And you?" she said. "What is it for you?" The question, as always.
It went straight to the center of the thing. "It's for me to say it out loud," I said. "In a room full of people who've been watching me live at a distance for years. It's for me to stop letting the story of Darien Oena be told entirely by people who only know the buildings." She had agreed. On her terms, no styling team, no wardrobe consultation from my PR department, no briefing about what to say or how to stand. She arrived in a dress she had chosen herself, how a deep burgundy that she wore the way she wore everything, like it had been made for her because she had decided it suited her. And that was the end of the discussion. She arrived at the building at exactly the time she had said she would arrive. Not early, not late. Exactly on time, the way Amara did everything, with the quiet precision of a person who respected her own commitments. I met her in the lobby. She looked at the hall through the glass doors, the rows of journalists, the cameras on tripods, the particular contained electricity of a press gathering that knows it has something, and she breathed in slowly through her nose. One long, measured breath. Then she looked at me. "Ready?" I asked. "Are you?" she said. I took her hand. It was the same hand that had settled over mine on the armrest on the 54th floor. The night I told her about my father and my mother and the boy in the dark making promises. It was the same hand that had retied a little girl's ribbon without looking down. The same hand that had corrected the angle of my corn and adjusted the bracelet at her wrist and held mine on the street in Ajegunle while the October light came down around us. Her fingers closed around mine, and I pushed the door open and walked us both into the light. The cameras came alive immediately. A wall of sound, the rapid percussion of shutters, the particular white brightness of press photography that flattens everything it touches except the thing it's pointed at. Questions began before we had fully crossed the threshold. I felt them more than I heard them. A blur of names and assumptions and the hungry, slightly predatory energy of a room full of people who had been handed a story and were now trying to determine its dimensions. I stood at the podium. Amara stood beside me, not behind me, not to the side, and at a careful half-step of deference beside me. She had positioned herself there without instruction, and I had not adjusted it because it was exactly right, and she had known it was exactly right before I did. I looked out at the room, at the cameras and the journalists and the faces of people who had been writing versions of this story for weeks, using information they had assembled from photographs and speculation and the Lagos tendency to construct complete narratives from incomplete evidence. And I did not have notes. "I'm not going to make a long statement," I said. The room settled. Most of what has been written about my personal life in recent weeks has been written by people who are good at writing and not particularly invested in accuracy. I want to correct that directly." I paused. "This is Amara." I said her name the way it deserved to be said, without qualification, without the framing architecture of context or explanation. Just her name, placed in the room cleanly, like a thing that needed no introduction because it was simply, entirely itself. She is not a project. She is not a charity. She is not a phase or a story or a contrast that makes me look interesting. She is the person who reminded me what being human feels like. My voice was steady. The trembling was still there underneath it, but it was contained now, held by something stronger than itself. That is what she is. That is all you need to know. The cameras continued. All questions were forming at the edges of the room. Amara's fingers tightened around mine, barely perceptibly, the smallest increase in pressure. Then she leaned slightly toward me and her voice came at the edge of my ear, quiet enough that only I could hear it beneath the noise. "You're shaking," she said. I looked straight ahead at the cameras. "Only when I'm brave," I said. A beat. Then I felt it, beside me, at the edge of my peripheral vision, or in the warm pressure of her hand in mine. She smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the room, for me. The way she had always smiled, like the happiness in it, came from somewhere the world didn't have access to. Like it was hers first, and she was choosing, freely and deliberately, to let me stand inside it. The cameras kept flashing, Lagos kept watching. And Darien Oena, 30 years old, builder of glass towers, a man who had convinced himself that love was a luxury he couldn't afford, stood in the brightest room of his career, holding the hand of a woman from a market street, more certain of one thing than he had ever been certain of anything in his life. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, not performing it, not constructing it, living it. Finally, fully, completely. We walked, no car, no Emmanuel waiting at the curb with the engine running, my no security detail moving at a careful distance behind us, earpieces in, eyes scanning. Just two people on a Lagos evening, moving through the city the way the city had always moved, on foot, in the noise, inside the ordinary, extraordinary texture of a place that does not slow down for anyone, and somehow, when you stop asking it to, becomes exactly the right speed. It was Amara's idea. She had looked at the car outside Oena Tower after the press conference, and at Emmanuel holding the door with his customary professionalism, and she had said quietly, not to him, to me, "Can we walk for a bit?" And I had looked at her and understood that she was not asking about exercise. She was asking for something real after an hour of cameras. Something unmediated. Something that belonged only to us. I told Emmanuel to follow slowly. Then I thought better of it. "Go home," I said. I'll call you." He looked at me for precisely 1 second. The look of a man who had spent 7 years managing the logistics of my safety and was now being asked to suspend them. And then he nodded, got in the car, drove away. And we walked. The evening was warm, the way Lagos evenings in that season are warm. Not oppressively, not with the heavy, wet heat of the rainy months, but with a dry, golden warmth that sits on the skin like something intentional. Yet the streets were busy, in the way that streets near the island always are at that hour. Office workers moving toward bus stops, hawkers calling their last sales of the day, the particular late afternoon energy of a city shifting gears from the urgency of work into the looser rhythm of evening. No one stopped us. A few people looked. I saw the flicker of recognition in 2 or 3 faces, the slight double take of someone placing a familiar name on an unfamiliar context. But Lagos, for all its appetite for spectacle, has a deep and abiding respect for people who are simply moving through it. The city absorbs you if you let it. If you stop performing and just walk, it walks with you. Amara walked the way she always walked when she was relaxed, her pace easy, her shoulders down, her attention moving fluidly between the street and the sky and the small details of things we passed. She pointed at a woman arranging tomatoes on a low table with a precision that made her smile in recognition. She paused at a corner where 2 old men were playing a board game on an upturned crate, watching them for a moment with the unhurried interest of someone who finds the world genuinely interesting rather than performing interest for an audience. I watched her more than I watched the street. I had been doing this for months, watching her move through the world with that particular ease, that groundedness, that complete absence of the performative self-consciousness that wealth and visibility had calcified into my own bearing over years. She moved like someone who knew where she belonged, not because she had been told, not because the world had validated it, just because she knew. I had spent 30 years building things that announced my belonging from a distance. She simply belonged wherever she stood. We turned onto a quieter road, and the noise of the main street softened behind us. A jacaranda tree at the edge of a compound had dropped purple flowers across the pavement, and we walked through them without moving around them. I looked at the city ahead of us, the low rooftops, the evening light coming down between the buildings at an angle that turned everything it touched briefly golden, the water visible at the far end of the road where the island gave way to the lagoon. I had looked at this city from 54 floors above it for years. It had never looked like this. "You know," I said, "for 30 years I built a kingdom." She glanced at me sideways, waiting. Buildings, companies, net worth, all of it constructed with the specific intention of never needing anything I didn't already own. I paused. Kingdoms are empty places. I didn't understand that for a long time. Empty and very, very loud with silence. She was quiet for a moment. Then, and with the lightness she deployed precisely when a moment needed it, not to diminish it, but to let it breathe. "And what does that make me?" She looked at me, one eyebrow slightly lifted, the half smile at the corner of her mouth, the eyes that held everything clearly and returned it honestly. I stopped walking. She stopped beside me. I looked at her, at this woman who had sold corn in lantern light and negotiated the terms of a bracelet and told me she wouldn't shrink herself, and held my hand on the street where I grew up and stood beside me, in front of cameras without rehearsal, and whispered, "You're shaking," with the tenderness of someone who understood that bravery and fear were not opposites, but the same thing wearing different faces. And I looked at her the way you look at something you did not know you had been looking for your entire life until the moment you found it, and the finding was so quiet, so ordinary, so completely without spectacle, that the only adequate response was the simplest word you had. "Home," I said. Not a metaphor, not a line constructed for effect. The truest word I owned, offered plainly, the way she had always offered her truths, without decoration, without distance. She looked at me, and the half-smile became whole, not the composed smile of the woman at the corn stall, not the warm, amused smile of the woman watching me fail at corn, not even the fragile, full smile on the street in Ayagunle in the October light. This was new. This was the smile of a woman receiving the right word at the right moment from the right person, and knowing it, completely in her body before her mind had fully processed it. The smile that doesn't ask any questions because all the questions have finally, quietly been answered. Lagos moved around us, the city breathed, the evening light held, and Darien Oena, the boy from Ajagunle, the man in the glass tower, the billionaire who had built a kingdom and lived alone in its silence for 30 years, stood on a quiet street with purple flowers at his feet, and the woman who had cracked him open, standing in front of him, smiling like the world had always been this simple. It had always been this simple. He had just needed her to show him. The light faded slowly, the city carried on, and they walked together home.